Hello, my name is Tori Rudolph. I'm Strategic Partnerships Manager at FinTech Australia. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that I am hosting and recording this webinar on the lands of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. I also acknowledge the traditional custodians of the various lands of which you all work today and the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people participating in this webinar. Pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and celebrate the diversity of the Aboriginal peoples and their ongoing cultures and connections to the lands and waters of Australia. With that, we're really excited to welcome you all to our Pre-Intersekt webinar with Currencycloud. We've been really grateful for Currencycloud's support of Intersekt 2023, and we're delighted to welcome this session to those that can't make it to Melbourne next week. If you would like to hear more from Currencycloud, they'll be speaking as well as exhibiting at the conference next week. If you're not able to make it, no worries. We have a fantastic session today, How Fintechs Can Unlock Success. So with that, I'd like to introduce James Reed, the Global Head of Commercial at Send Payments, and introduce and hand over to Nick Briscoe, Country Manager Australia at Currencycloud.
Thanks very much, Tori, and really appreciate FinTech Australia for putting on this webinar ahead of Intersekt 2023 in Melbourne next week. We're all very excited about it, as Tori said. Also, really big thanks to Send Payments and very much so to James Reed, Send Payments Global Head of Commercial, who joins me here today.
Thanks for having me.
Firstly, just a little bit of admin for anybody who would like to ask a question throughout. We'd encourage you to drop those into the Q&A as we go through the webinar, and then we can move through those at the end as well. And any additional questions obviously can be asked at the end as well. James, we'll move on to the Send Payments business in a minute. But first off, I'd really like to find out a little bit more about you, the arc of your career, and most importantly, as an Englishman, how you ended up here in Australia working at Send Payments.
Yeah. I mean, ultimately, I was dragged across here by my wife on the promise of actually at the time no COVID and better weather. And I think that was 3 or 4 years ago. Actually, we were in London in the height of lockdown, and it just was not ideal. And we looked at Australia, and there was no COVID, and everyone was out and about and enjoying themselves. So we kind of made the jump, and we were like, let's go and do it. Sure enough, 18 months later, after we'd worked through all the visa stuff, we arrived in Sydney into hotel quarantine with 2 children. And then once we got out of hotel quarantine, we spent the next 6 months basically in quarantine because it rained every day for 23 hours a day for that period of time. So anyway, I'm really happy to be here. Seriously, it's sun shining outside. We're enjoying ourselves. But yeah, that's kind of the origins of it. I was working in London. I was actually in the world of fitness before I was in finance, so natural kind of career trajectory from fitness to finance. But it was where I kind of first came across the power of partnerships. I was working in like a high-end members gym on Harley Street in London. If you're familiar, it's kind of the medical district of London, very famous for cosmetic surgery, but we tried to do more of the preventative stuff rather than the after the fact. So and that was, but we had a lot of good partnerships with medical professionals around the area. We referred one another business, and that's really where I got my interest in partnerships, and then subsequently moved on to World First, who some of you might know as an AMP Financial owned company, who are the financial services arm behind Alibaba. Went through that whole kind of acquisition, the sale, and so on and so forth, and yeah, a couple of years ago, decided that we'd move down under, give it a try.
Very good. I think it's a familiar refrain of people being dragged to a foreign country by a partner, but I guess you're thankful that you were dragged out here to Australia with such a vibrant fintech scene, and likewise better weather.
Yeah.
For people who aren't familiar with the Send Payments business, it'd be great to really get the insider's guide of the Send story, the genesis of the business, and really what it looks like today.
Yeah, so once we made the decision to move to Australia, we kind of thought, we'll take 6 months when we get here, try and find some jobs, find somewhere to live, find a place for the kids to go to kindy and all of that sort of stuff. But I actually came across the role with Send about 6 months before I came, and it was in the period that they were still very much Gold Coast centric. Everyone was really there. They had probably 30 odd people up on the Gold Coast, and it was in that period of time where they wanted to diversify slightly, have someone in Sydney. So I set up the Sydney office. And it was me co-working strangely with a bunch of architects in the very early days 2 years ago. And it's been really cool to see, because we've kind of upsized and now in like a bigger office, and now looking at doing so again. So I think we're about 15 in Sydney now, still 15 on the Gold Coast, and then 55 to 60 across the rest of the country, and actually in a few international locations as well. So it's been really, really cool to see the business grow over the last couple of years that I've been involved. What do? We're basically an international payments engine. So we help people and businesses to move their money around the world. Typically, the mechanism by which we do that is very much through partnerships. So we try and give our partners more, the ability to do more for their customers, spend more time with them, give them additional revenue streams, give them value adds, creating better experiences. So it's all around delivering international payments as a service into other people's businesses. The foreign exchange industry over the last couple of decades has been pretty focused on let's bash the banks. Let's say, yeah, they charge loads, they're really slow, they're this, they're that, and the next thing. We try and take a little bit of a different approach to that. As I mentioned, we're all about kind of creating those experiences for partners and their customers, noting that we very much rely on the cornerstone of the banking infrastructure and other service providers to allow us to do what we do. So our job is to get a payment from its origination to its destination, and to do that in the best way possible. And that best way possible is not always about lowest cost and fast speed. Like there's a myriad of different reasons as to why a payment should be sent a certain way, and it's our job to connect those dots. So where are we today? 5th year, like I said. I think we're on track to process somewhere in the region of $2.5 to $3 billion in the next year. And in terms of our, who we are as a brand, it's well, despite my very pink background, we do say that we are the brand behind the brand, powering other people to do what they want to do.
Yeah, very good. And look, honestly, phenomenal growth trajectory. Obviously, we know each other as Sen being a client of Currencycloud, but amazing growth trajectory the business has been on over the last 5 years, and a credit to really everyone in the team. I definitely agree with your comments about the criticism of the banks. It was super easy for fintechs for quite a long period of time to say, hey, we're going to have a bank killing app. Thankfully, I think a lot of that has sort of receded off into the distance. I think we all realize the banks are a really key pillar of our own growth trajectory, and us being able to provide that network of networks is super important as fintech organizations. I think, interestingly as well, I think from a partnerships perspective, one of the things we're starting to see is some of the smaller banking institutions, particularly sort of mutual banks, where they do want to offer a cross-border capability. Really interesting to start to see them come to fintech organizations like Send and say, hey, we actually want to do this as a partnership. It's not part of our core offering to customers. So I don't know if that's a thing you're seeing as well, but we're certainly hearing a few noises about that.
Yeah, we're very interested in that space. We quite early on we signed Woolworths Team Bank as a partner of ours, so we've always had kind of an eye on that industry, and I know it's one that the customers are very much at the center of what they do, right? So I think what they are all about is creating those better experiences, but also looking at how they can reduce risk in what they do. FX is not necessarily the absolute core function of a mutual bank or a customer-owned bank. So, if they can kind of remove that risk associated, because it's, as we know, like setting up a foreign exchange international payments business, or more broadly, a finance or fintech business, is complex. It comes with a lot of regulatory complexities and things to deal with. So if they can remove that complexity and remove that risk away from themselves, but refer to a business that they know will do a great job by their customers, then I think broadly they're happy. So yeah, it's definitely a space that we keep a real eye on.
Yeah. And most importantly, with half the business split between Sydney and the Gold Coast, how much argy-bargy is there for trips up to the head office during winter?
Yeah, quite a bit. Yeah, quite a bit. It's
sure
where we
there
do
is.
all of our get-togethers.
Exactly.
I'm sure you won't be. Also, my CEO, actually the three co-founders, are all based up there. So yeah,
Very sensible.
yeah.
Look, you started at Send as a head of partnerships, and look, Send has signed some really key partnerships. One of the most high profile, I think, is probably PEXA, the real estate settlement platform, which from my own personal view, I thought was a really smart pairing. Obviously, real estate is a key plank of the Australian economy, and a lot of foreign investment comes into and out of real estate pretty regularly. So I thought it was really smart as a partnership to do. What if you were looking at the partnerships that you've done at both World First and at Send, what would you say are the markers you think of a genuinely great partnership?
Yeah, so I'll come back to PEXA because I think it's important to address that, because it has got all of the the hallmarks of a very, very good partnership for lots of different reasons, and it hasn't been perfect from day one, as any partnership isn't really. It takes work. I think that the most important thing, what I've seen over the last few years working very specifically in partnerships, is I think the word partnership is often a little bit used and abused. I think nowadays everyone's kind of referring to their clients as partners, and I don't know if that's necessarily always true. I think a client is someone who comes and they pay you for your service or offering, and they kind of go about their day thereafter. A partnership is very much a mutual decision to enhance one another's lives, product offerings, and so on and so forth. So I think when you go and define that, I think it is really important. There's nothing wrong with having clients. There's nothing wrong with having partners. It's just about ensuring that as soon as you do have a partnership in place, that you really are working together to try and improve and promote one another's lives and offerings. So I think that's the first thing. When we look at how we approach a partnership, we know that what we want as an outcome from the partnerships as two organizations won't always be exactly the same. So it's really important to work out what those outcomes are. When we look at our perspective, the last couple of years has been all about top line revenue, right? So that drives some commercial decisions. It drives some decisions as part of a partnership. Now that we're looking much more around pathway to profitability, we look at partnerships and opportunities slightly different. And we can expect that is the same for the partners that we deal with. For some people, it's going to be about the extra revenue stream. For some people, it's going to be spending more time with their customers. For others, it's going to be about the value add. Others, it's going to be the message that they can put forward to the market. So I think setting those outcomes and having those very, very clear from the outset is hugely important, and also having the boundaries around that. So we've got the outcomes, we've got the boundaries. Where are the go areas? Where are the no-go areas? Especially in a world where often there's competition with partners as well, because often you're kind of overlapping in product offering. It's a little bit gray area. So I think those boundaries are really, really important to have. And that's something we like to approach. So yeah, outcomes and boundaries, like any marriage or partnership, I think absolutely important to set from the outset. One of the big things, and I've been as responsible for this as anyone else with partnerships, is you often see them flop. The best partnership on paper in the world, what I should say is the best partnership in any boardroom in the world, doesn't necessarily filter down to the people who it really matters to and really need to be engaged in order to bring that partnership to life. So that's why you've got to work through. How do we get that engagement from that boardroom where pen is put to paper, right the way down to the engagement, the people on the front line who are actually going to bring that to life? More than anything, to ensure there's operational intertwinement between, when does the job of the partner start and stop? When does your job as the other party to that start and stop? And how does that all feed back into the start of that journey? So the foundations need to be right. You need to understand who that end customer is, size, industry, behaviors, sophistication. What sort of products do they need? Do you have those products? If not, how are you going to work together to ensure that they're getting their kind of ultimate product whilst working on iterations and MVP right through to that ultimate product. So that's all about, where we like to see that is commitment to meeting a partner where they are now. Because there's so many different pieces of the puzzle to kind of slot together. So meeting them at where they are now with a solution that works for now, but also committing to them to work together over time to ensure that you're doing more for them and you're innovating with them, I think is something that's really important. It's actually something that we write into some of our contracts. So we've actually got a couple of partners, enterprise level partners, who we commit a percentage of the revenue as a partnership to innovation. It's basically an innovation pool. Now, it might not be put towards innovation, but that is very much the idea. It is there to ensure that like there are better experiences for those partners. Just coming back to PEXA as an example for that, we plonked a presentation on their desk a couple of years ago saying, by the way, like international payments from your platform could be really, really good. Could be really good for you guys from additional revenue standpoint. Could be great for your customers who are conveyancers and legal professionals, so that they don't have to go to a branch and submit a what do they call it, a telegraphic transfer to their customer who might be overseas, experiencing rates that are reasonably high. I think we saw an opportunity to improve that whole kind of offering. So we put that on their desk. They came back saying we don't really necessarily see this, and then we kept on pushing and just saying, look, this is a real opportunity to do more and spend more time with your customers. And since that point, it's just all been about iterating. We've got tens of people on both sides of the partnership working together to try and make this a more integrated, better solution. And that's where we're at the moment, right? So we met them where they were now, which was we needed to provide a referral mechanism whereby they could refer customers to us, and they would become very much send customers, because the technology and the interface wasn't there for them to be able to consume what we have via API direct into their platform. But that's where we're building towards now. So yeah, meet them where they are, look to innovate, look to iterate, and make sure you've got that good solid feedback loop coming in off the back.
Love it. I really love the marriage analogy as well. I think lots of people sit, to your point, in a boardroom and count the revenue and assume that they're all going to get rich off partnerships. But typically, all the hard work starts once you say, I do. And that, to realize the full potential, it's a huge amount of effort from everybody. I think, talking from Currencycloud's experience, very similar experience. We have seen a lot of partnerships that haven't worked out as sort of people have expected. The ones that have worked out really well is the ones that have had money put into them, and particularly around integration layers, core banking platforms, those type of platforms where funds have gone in to build an integration and have that ready made for customers. Really important. But that obviously requires that commitment that you rightly point out, and putting aside some of the revenue to say, hey, we're going to utilize this for the partnership.
Yeah.
Very good. Look, dovetailing with this, and you sort of alluded to it, people throw around the word partnerships quite a lot, and we often really think of them as the people who pay us, or more correctly, as clients. But the reality is service providers obviously at times get that partner label as well. And those service providers are really super critical to our business, and probably never more so in an environment now in the payment space where we're sort of seeing US banks fall over every other weekend. We're seeing big Swiss banks subsumed into their larger counterparts. And what do you think are the things that fintechs should be thinking about when they're selecting what, let's call those upstream partners or service providers? And I guess we should note here again that Currencycloud is one of those upstream service providers to send. So only compliments. Thanks, James.
Well, I mean, it's fortunate that it very much fits with my narrative previous thing, which is Currencycloud very much met send where they were at the time, which was, I mean, we were essentially nowhere, right? So Currencycloud gave us that the underlying infrastructure to actually build our business from. So those upstream partners are absolutely critical. And I think that's, again, it comes back to that blend of product offering, but also over just kind of underpinning that with a good like relationship management aspect to the business, ensuring that everything's going well, ensuring that we've got all the bits and pieces that we need to be successful with the business. I think other things to think about are what are your growth plans? So is it new geographies? Is it new products? We're kind of in that scale stage now, so we need to be more intentional with the decisions that we make when we introduce any new products or any new geographies. So I think we're kind of at the stage now where we do have a little bit more luxury to think about how we're actually going to do things and bring things to life. I think when we look 4 or 5 years ago, we didn't necessarily have that luxury. When we were really in that kind of startup stage, we just needed to make things happen to get that revenue coming through the door. So I think the other big thing that we need to think about, and I think in the international payment space in particular, what we've seen is like a bit of a challenge when it comes to big kind of Australian banks and potentially a little bit of debanking, de-risking going on across the sector over the last few years. And I think we've only really been saved from the spotlight by crypto, which has really taken the bonus on that front. So what we always think about is very much redundancy as well. So when we look at a current service provider, what are they offering now? What are their plans? So how can we work together to ensure we know what's on their roadmap? And then ultimately, how can we look at our redundancy mechanism to make sure that we have providers in place so that if one kind of falls flat, then we're not too exposed. So I think that's a super important thing to think about. So one, again, we'll come back to meet you where you are. Can they do that? Can they do what you want to do and now? Can they scale with you? Do they have the underlying infrastructure? Do they have the right people involved? Are they committed, engaged enough to do so? 3, do they maintain that engagement on an ongoing basis? I think, like we talked about, partnerships very, very easy up front. All sounds good on a piece of paper and in a boardroom, but ultimately, when push comes to shove, and you're a couple of years into the partnership, are we still in the same position? And again, I come back to that kind of feedback loop. Do we keep on, continuing to iterate, continuing to think about how we can do more for those underlying customers? Because ultimately, to a certain extent, they're shared.
Yeah, very much so. And look, sticking with the theme of the current operating environment, which seems to be the topic of just about every LinkedIn post that I view these days, and seems to be almost unrelentingly negative, which I don't necessarily agree with. The last 18 months has obviously seen a massive change in that the risk-free rate for interest rates has gone from 0 to, call it, 5% globally. And human nature being what it is, it's always to see the threats out there on the horizon first. But those threats aside, any sort of big change obviously creates opportunities. And just interested to get your thoughts on what you think those positive opportunities are out there for the Send payments business, as well as more broadly in the payments landscape.
Yeah. Well, specifically for Send, I'm going to say we were lucky because we 4 years ago took a very deliberate decision to really focus on revenue. And that's where I was talking about earlier with Currencycloud and being able to have that infrastructure in place really, really quickly. It meant that we could then go and focus on that acquisition of partners and ultimately that revenue. So that strong revenue in itself, even 2 or 3 years ago, when cash rates were 0, was able to attract strong investment. In that stage, there was more of a focus on the bells and whistles products, right? Like we saw a lot of money being raised at pretty crazy valuations off of pitch decks, basically based off of ideas. And the market's really come full circle. I think that's a very natural cycle, but I think people are actually looking at real businesses, real pathway, pathway to profitability is the new thing that we're hearing everywhere now. And I think it does set aside those businesses that do have that real opportunity to continue with strong growth versus just those ones with the good products, the good ideas on paper. So I think we've definitely seen that investor sentiment shift in a big way. But like I said, we were quite lucky with that because we started with the premise of we need to keep bringing money in to hopefully be as sustainable by ourselves as quickly as possible. And that gave us some flexibility to now go back and look at how do we make things better at Send? How do we build more scalable products? How do we build more products? How do we build more features for our customers? What do I think about the current landscape for other businesses? Potentially, it's a bit of a dampener, right? Like I think the real innovation will always, I really hope, will always kind of rise to the top. Cream will rise to the top, right? But I think, will we see those ideas all starting in the first place, or will we see that kind of nipped in the bud before it even gets a chance to gain momentum? So I think that's the real concern. It's like we've seen so much good innovation over the last few years because people have been able to raise money while money has been free, and it really just like funds that trajectory and that growth. So I think that's been really, really exciting. But my hope and my expectation is that there will just be less bets. There will be less bets on what might work, but there will be more concentration of funding to ideas that are really the cream of the crop.
Yeah. I think it definitely demands more conviction from investors right now than ever. The sort of spray and pray of lots of small investments has certainly disappeared. So yeah, really interesting insight there. I guess the other component is the M&A aspect that we're sort of starting to see early stages of in fintechs, right? I think we are potentially going to get larger companies that maybe have neglected technology to a certain extent are going to try and pay down that technical debt via an acquisition. Just because of where valuations are at as well. So that will also be interesting to see that play out.
Yeah, we've seen some of that already, haven't we, in the market?
Yeah, very much so. So you kicked off your career in the UK with World First, as we talked about earlier. And again, from a cultural and regulatory point of view, there's a lot of alignment that is perceived between Australia and the UK. And they're seen as really similar sort of markets. We've seen a lot of UK fintechs come down and launch here in Australia quite successfully, Currencycloud being one of those, obviously, but then a lot of consumer-facing businesses as well do quite well. Whilst I think the similarities are pretty clear, really interested to hear your views on what you think is actually different between Australia and the UK. Particularly, we have the British consulate now arranging the regular delegations for the Australia-UK FinTech Bridge. I think that'd be super valuable insight for those audience members coming down for that.
Yeah, my wife actually sat me down before we came to Australia. Like, look, Australia is going to feel really small. And I was like, how's that possible? Like, it's such a big country. But she assured me that it would. And if you think about it, I lived in London for a long time, and you can be as anonymous as you like in London. You just go to a different pocket of London and that's it. You might not see anyone for days on end. On a personal level here, I can't walk up the road without spending 5 minutes speaking to multiple different people en route. So I think that became quite true on a personal level pretty early, but is very much the same in the business world. So I think it's very small. Like the fintech environment is a small one. Everyone kind of knows everyone, right? And I think that's a really nice thing and a good kind of it's nice to have that familiarity, but people just kind of know what's going on more broadly in the market. And I think we also see that in collaboration. I think despite people being in competition with one another, people are always still happy in the Australian market to work together and to collaborate on the basis of uplifting the standard in Australia, which I think, by the way, is very high. As a kind of baseline in terms of consumers and what they are familiar with doing and able to do, I think that far exceeds the UK market in terms of sophistication on new products and new technology. So that's kind of my view on what's different. I don't think I've been here long enough to really work it out just yet, and that's why I think my first trip to Intersekt is going to be so good, just being able to engage with people. But I think on balance, yeah, we've got kind of that national audience. They're keen to see innovation. They're keen to try new things. But I think there is also enough pain in the market and pain in products and user experiences for people to continue to want to make a difference to that.
Yeah. And you look, I think, interesting, you sort of alluded to it there in terms of the customer behavior, but I think for a lot of UK fintechs launching into Australia in particular, they don't realize just how competitive it is. And in fact, even if we look at the offering that's provided by the major banks here in Australia, it's very much digital first, mobile first. Australians typically really early adopters of technology. Lots of fintechs and banks try things out here as the sort of proving ground for their new ideas. So it's substantially different from a lot of other markets in the world in that respect. So, and also customer inertia is high. So people, if they can get an okay experience through their banking app, will typically use that rather than necessarily migrate away to a fintech. So I do think people underestimate that competitive environment at times out here.
Definitely. And I think that's where I was talking about the Australian fintech ecosystem really coming together to try and fight back against those companies entering the market, particularly those kind of super app, more global power players who come into the market and expect that they can sort of pick up good market share by doing so. What we've realized is that a lot of those small, medium-sized Australian fintechs who typically offer one or two products as a specialism, they're actually looking for ways to integrate more products into their offering so they can fight back against those guys who are coming into the market. So I think it's a really healthy dynamic, those bigger companies coming in, offering potentially better customer experiences, better journeys, and it forces that kind of innovation and that healthy competition from local Australian businesses who do want to keep their customers and all of that stuff. So yeah,
absolutely agree with you. Again, a common theme we're seeing amongst our clients. Obviously, Currencycloud is a Visa-owned business. One of the things we're helping a lot of our clients with is for example, multi-currency Visa card issuance. So it provides those a fintech that might be in the wealth sector, as an example, so not historically operated as a payments business. So then go and have that reason to communicate with the customer and gain more of their wallet share by offering a multi-currency Visa debit card. And it's a much richer experience, I think, for the underlying customer, but most importantly, provides a reason for them to stick with you and keep funds with that fintech organization rather than moving off to an alternative platform.
Yeah, absolutely.
You mentioned the fintech ecosystem there here in Australia. What are your thoughts about the next 5 years and what that might potentially look like? So you might have to dust off your crystal ball for this one.
So I think we've seen a bit of pain over the last 12 to 18 months. But I think what I envisage, what we are starting to see, and I'll go back to what I said before, is more companies looking at how they can spend more time with their customers, make more money from them, add service offerings in there, improve experiences right the way through. So that's what I'm really seeing, is that margins across a lot of sectors are very much getting compressed. But I think there is the opportunity to maintain those margins by offering a more all-inclusive experience within your platform. So I think we often get taught, and I've often been taught, to really hone in and focus on those one or two things that are that you believe will truly kind of make you successful. And I think that whilst that is true, and you do need to have that element of focus, you also need to have that broader view of what's out there and what those threats are as they come into the Australian market. So yeah,
I think definitely a little bit of a thawing of that risk appetite, don't you think, that has happened over the last little while? I don't think that's true in EMEA, and perhaps it's not true in North America just yet, but certainly in Australia, it feels like things are, risk appetite's coming back in and people getting used to the new normal.
Yeah, and I think like you said, that cycle will come around. I think we've had a year or so of we raised a year ago, and we were quite lucky because strong revenue growth. We were able to recognize an 80 to 90% up round in that environment, which was great, but it was very much driven by that revenue growth. So I think we're seeing people start to get much more interested now. So I think it is a good time. And like I said, hopefully it comes kind of full circle where maybe it won't be where it was a couple of years ago. I don't think we'll make that mistake again, but potentially the purse strings might start to be loosened somewhat. And we can ensure that the companies out there who are doing great things are able to be funded to be able to keep on doing it.
Yeah. Very good. And Intersekt is just around the corner next week in Melbourne. What are you most looking forward to about the event? You did mention there that it will be your first.
Yeah. So yeah, exactly that. I'm just looking forward to being there for the first time. I've heard lots and lots of good things, and I feel the vibrancy of the Australian fintech community. But most of the time, I feel it very much sat behind my computer, and it's like I'm just looking forward to being out and about and seeing it in action, and yeah, just speaking to everyone and bouncing ideas off each other and all that sort of stuff. Yeah, I'm just keen to get there.
Yeah, very good. Look, mine was first time last year as well, and you alluded to this earlier in our conversation, but despite all the competitiveness, the fintech scene here in Australia is super collegiate and super open to sharing ideas, and the general support as well. I think over what it's like, as you rightly point out, has been a pretty difficult 18 months for people to navigate, is really great to see. So it is a fantastic event, and once again, thanks to FinTech Australia for putting it on. So I don't think we have any questions. If there are any ones to go in quickly, that would be good. Otherwise, we can move on. We'll just maybe give it a couple of seconds. Okay, very good. We might finish up there. James, really appreciate your time. Thanks very much. For anybody who didn't get a chance to ask a question or is watching the recording at a later stage, both James and I will be down at Intersekt next week. We're also, funnily enough, on a panel together as well, so you get to hear us speak again. That might be a dubious honor. If you want to grab us out of the crowd and learn more about either the Currencycloud or the Send Payments business, please do so. We'd welcome the conversation. Thanks again to FinTech Australia, and James, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks all.